live now. Forge Gang! I am still a hard man. I am your host, Imperator of Forge, otherwise known as Forge Warhammer, and I am here today with a new book that I will be going into, Proclaimers of God's Kingdom. Alrighty then, so Jehovah's Witnesses, Proclaimers of God's Kingdom is the title of the book. Forward. Jehovah's Witnesses are a people widely known. Their preaching and way of worship have penetrated national and racial groups worldwide and have been embraced by people young and old at every economic and educational level. Their zeal as proclaimers of God's kingdom has impressed even their critics. Their love toward one another makes some non-witnesses wish that more people acted that way. Yet many still wonder who really are Jehovah's Witnesses. Others have written about them, not always impartially. Probably they were not aware of all the facts. Certainly, no one knows their modern-day history better than they themselves do. The editors of this volume have endeavored to be objective and to present a candid history. To all who are aware of what the Bible foretells for the last days, this history of a people who intensely believe and preach what the Bible says will be especially enlightening. The publishers. All right, so these are the contents. As you can see here, this is the title. All right. I will be starting with section number 1. You are my witnesses, says Jehovah. Why would Jehovah have witnesses? Who are they? This section, chapters 1 to 9, provides a concise review of Jehovah's use of witnesses from ancient times right down to our day. Each succeeding section contains an in-depth discussion on a specific aspect of that history. Chapter 1. Why should Jehovah have witnesses? Jehovah's Witnesses are known worldwide for their persistence in talking to people everywhere about Jehovah God and his kingdom. They also have the reputation of being a people who hold to their beliefs despite all manner of opposition, even death. The principal victims of religious persecution in the United States in the 20th century were the Jehovah's Witnesses, says the book, The Court and the Constitution, by Archibald Cox, 1987. Jehovah's Witnesses have been harassed and persecuted by governments the world over, states Tommy Hodges. Even in Nazi Germany, they were rounded up and sent to concentration camps. During the Second World War, the Watchtower Society was banned in Australia and Canada. Now, in the 1970s, the Jehovah's Witnesses are being hounded in Africa. Jehovah's Witnesses in Africa, 1985 edition. Why the persecution? What is the objective of the preaching? Have Jehovah's Witnesses really been commissioned by God? Why would Jehovah have witnesses anyway? And imperfect human witnesses at that? The answers have to do with issues being tried in a universal court case, by far the most crucial case ever to be argued. We must examine these issues in order to understand why Jehovah has witnesses and why these witnesses are willing to endure even the most intense opposition. All right, so the picture here to the left, the lower left of this page, the events in Eden raised important issues. Is Jehovah's sovereignty righteous? Will his creatures be faithful to him? Jehovah's sovereignty challenged. Those vital issues involve the righteous. These Jehovah's sovereignty challenged. These vital issues involve the rightfulness of the sovereignty or supreme rulership of Jehovah God. He is the universal sovereign by reason of his creatorship, his godship, and his almightiness. Genesis chapter 17, verse 1, Exodus chapter 6, verse 3, Revelations chapter 4, verse 11. He thus has rightful domination over everything in heaven and on earth. But he always administers his sovereignty in love. What then does he ask in return from his intelligent creatures? That they love him and show appreciation for his sovereignty. Yet thousands of years ago, a challenge was hurled against Jehovah's rightful sovereignty. How? By whom? Genesis, the first book of the Bible, sheds light on the matter. It reports that God created the first human pair, Adam and Eve, and gave them a beautiful garden home. He also laid his command upon them. From every tree of the garden you may eat to satisfaction. But as for the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you must not eat from it. For in the day you eat from it, you will positively die. Genesis 2:16-17. What was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and what would eating of its fruit signify? It was a literal tree, but God employed it for a symbolic purpose, because he called it the tree of the knowledge of good and bad, and because he commanded that the first human pair not eat from it. The tree fittingly symbolized God's right to determine for humans what is good, pleasing to God, and what is bad, displeasing to God. The presence of this tree thus tested man's respect for God's sovereignty. Sadly, the first human pair disobeyed God and ate of the forbidden fruit. They failed this simple yet profound test of obedience and appreciation. Genesis 3:1-6. This seemingly small act constituted rebellion against Jehovah's sovereignty. How so? Understanding the way we humans are made is a key to understanding the significance of what Adam and Eve did. When Jehovah created the first human pair, he gave them a remarkable gift, free will. Contemplating this gift, Jehovah gave them mental abilities that included the powers of perception, reason, and judgment. Hebrews 5:14. They were not like mindless robots, nor were they like animals, which act mainly on instinct. Their freedom, though, was relative. subject to the rule of God's laws. Compare Jeremiah 10:23-24. Adam and Eve chose to eat of the forbidden fruit. They thus abused their freedom. What led them to this course? The Bible explains that a spirit creature of God had taken a willful course of opposition and resistance to God. This one, who later came to be known as Satan, spoke through a serpent in Eden and led Eve and through her Adam away from subjection to God's sovereignty. Revelations 12:9. By eating of the tree, Adam and Eve placed their judgment above God's, indicating that they wanted to judge for themselves what is good and what is bad. The issue thus raised was, does Jehovah have the right to rule humankind? And does he exercise his sovereignty in the best interests of his subjects? Humans can choose to benefit from Jehovah's sovereignty, but first they must hear about it. This issue was clearly implied by the serpent's words to Eve. Is it really so that God said you must not eat from every tree of the garden? The implication was that God was wrongfully withholding something good from the woman and her husband. The rebellion in Eden raised another issue. Can humans under test be faithful to God? This related issue was put in clear focus 24 centuries later in connection with faithful Job. Satan, the voice behind the serpent, challenged Jehovah to his face, saying, "Is it for nothing that Job has feared God?" Satan charged. "Have you not yourself put up a hedge about him and about his house and about everything that he has all around? The work of his hands you have blessed, and his livestock itself has spread abroad in the earth." Satan thus intimated that Job's uprightness was motivated by self-interest. He further charged skin in behalf of skin, and everything that a man has he will give in behalf of his soul. Since, as Jehovah had noted, there was no one like Job in the earth, Satan was really claiming that he could turn away any servant of God away from him. Job 1:8-11-2-4. All of God's servants was thus indirectly challenged regarding their integrity and loyalty to his sovereignty. Once raised, the issues had to be settled. The passage of time, about 6,000 years now, and the miserable failure of human governments clearly demonstrate that humans need God's sovereignty. But do they want it? Are there humans who will manifest heartfelt recognition of Jehovah's righteous sovereignty? Yes, Jehovah has his witnesses. But before we consider their testimony, let us first examine what is involved in being a witness. What it means to be a witness. The original language words translated witness provide insight into what it means to be a witness for Jehovah. In the Hebrew scriptures, the noun rendered witness, edath, is derived from the verb yudach, meaning return or repent. Do again in parentheses. Regarding the noun edeth, the theological word book of the Old Testament says, A witness is one who, by reiteration, emphatically affirms his testimony. The word etha or etha, ideth, is at home in the language of the court. Of the court. A comprehensive etymological dictionary of the Hebrew language for readers in English adds the original meaning of the verb urdatha probably was he said repeatedly and forcefully. In the Christian scriptures, the Greek words rendered witness martis, and bears witness, and bear witness. Martyrio, martarios, marterio, also had a legal connotation, although in time they took on a broader meaning. According to the Theological Dictionary, according to the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament, the concept of witness is used, both in the sense of witness to ascertainable facts, and also in that a witness to truths, i.e., the making down and confessing of convictions. So a witness relates facts from direct personal knowledge, or he proclaims views of truths of which he is convinced. The faithful course of first century Christians carried the meaning of witness a step further. Many of those early Christians witnessed under persecution and in the face of death. Acts chapter 22, verse 20. Revelations chapter 2, verse 13. As a result, by the 2nd century CE, the Greek word for witness, martis, from which is also derived the word martyr, acquired the meaning that applied to persons who were willing to seal the seriousness of their witness or confession by death. They were not called witnesses because they died. They died because they were loyal witnesses. Who then were the early witnesses of Jehovah, who were willing to proclaim repeatedly and forcefully, in words and by the way they lived, that Jehovah is the rightful, worthy sovereign, who were willing to maintain integrity to God even to death? Early witnesses of Jehovah, The Apostle Paul says, "We have so great a cloud," Greek, nephos, denoting a cloud mass of witnesses surrounding us, Hebrews chapter 12, verse 1. This cloud mass of witnesses began forming shortly after rebellion against God's sovereignty in Eden. At Hebrews chapter 11, verse 4, Paul identifies Abel as the first witness of Jehovah, saying, "By faith Abel offered God a sacrifice of greater worth than Cain, through which faith he had witness borne to him that he was righteous, God bearing witness respecting his gifts, and through it he, although he died, yet speaks." In what way did Abel serve as a witness for Jehovah? The answer centers around why Abel's sacrifice was of greater worth than Cain's. Abel was the first witness of Jehovah. Put simply, Abel made the right offering with the right motive and backed it up by right works. As a gift, he gave a blood sacrifice representing the life of the firstlings of his flock, whereas Cain offered lifeless produce. Genesis chapter 4, verses 3 and 4. Cain's sacrifice lacked the motivation of faith that made Abel's offering acceptable. Cain needed to modify his worship. Instead, he manifested his bad heart attitude by rejecting God's counsel and warning and by murdering faithful Abel. Genesis 4, 6-8. 1 John 3, 11, 12. Abel displayed the faith that his parents lacked. By his faithful course, he made known his conviction that Jehovah's sovereignty is righteous and worthy. During the century or so that he lived, Abel demonstrated that a man can be faithful to God to the point of sealing his testimony by death. And Abel's blood continues to speak for the inspired record of his martyrdom, for the inspired record of his martyrdom was preserved in the Bible for future generations. For example, some first-century Christians could bear witness to historical facts about Jesus concerning his life, death, and resurrection from first-hand knowledge. Acts 1, 21, 22, 10, 40, 41. However, persons who later put faith in Jesus could bear witness by proclaiming to others the significance of his life, death, and resurrection. Acts 22:15. Enoch bore witness about God's judgment against the ungodly. About 5 centuries after Abel's death, Enoch began walking with God, pursuing a course in harmony with Jehovah's standards of good and bad. Genesis 5:24. By then, rejection of God's sovereignty had led to a proliferation of ungodly practices among humankind. Enoch was convinced that the supreme sovereign would act against ungodly persons, and God's Spirit moved him to proclaim their future destruction. Jude 14:15. Enoch remained a faithful witness even to death, for Jehovah took him, apparently sparing him a violent death at the hands of his enemies. Hebrews 11:5. Enoch's name could thus be added to the growing list of the great cloud of witnesses of pre-Christian times. A spirit of ungodliness continued to pervade human affairs. During the lifetime of Noah, who was born about 70 years after Enoch's death, angelic sons of God came to the earth, evidently materializing in human form, and cohabitated with attractive women. The offspring they produced were known as Nephilim. They were giants among men. Genesis 6:1-4. What was the result of this unnatural union of spirit creatures with humans and of the hybrid race thus produced? The inspired record answers, consequently, Jehovah saw that the badness of man was abundant in the earth, and every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only bad all the time. So God saw the earth, and look, it was ruined, because all flesh had ruined its way on the earth. Genesis 6:5-12. How sad that the earth, God's footstool, was full of violence. Genesis 6:13, Isaiah 66:1. In contrast, Noah was a righteous man, one who proved himself faultless among his contemporaries. Genesis 6:9. He demonstrated his submission to God's sovereignty by doing just as God commanded. Genesis 6:22, acting in faith, he constructed an ark for the saving of his household. Hebrews 11:7. But Noah was more than a builder, or a preacher or herald of righteousness. He warned of the coming destruction. 2 Peter 2:5. Despite Noah's bold witnessing, however, that wicked generation took no note until the flood came and swept them all away. Matthew 24:37-39. Following Noah's day, Jehovah had witnesses among the post-flood patriarchs. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph are mentioned as an early part of the cloud of pre-Christian witnesses. Hebrews 11:8-22, 12:1. They demonstrated their support of Jehovah's sovereignty, doing so by keeping integrity. Genesis 18:18-19. They thus contributed to the sanctification of Jehovah's name. Rather than seek security in some earthly kingdom, they publicly declared that they were strangers and temporary residents in the land, in faith, awaiting the city having real foundations, the builder and maker of which city is God. Hebrews 11:10-13. They accepted Jehovah as their ruler, anchoring their hope in the promised heavenly kingdom as an expression of his rightful sovereignty. Noah was a preacher of righteousness before God, destroyed the world by means of a deluge. And so here we have Noah proclaiming to a vile and wicked generation who refused to listen to his warnings of the ark as he builds the ark in preparation for the coming flood. Noah was one of the early witnesses of Jehovah. In the 16th century BCE, Abraham's descendants were slaves needing deliverance from Egyptian bondage. It was then that Moses and his brother Aaron became key figures in a battle of the gods. They appeared before Pharaoh and delivered Jehovah's ultimatum: "Send my people away." But proud Pharaoh hardened his heart. He did not want to lose a great nation of slave workers. "Who is Jehovah?" he replied, "so that I should obey his voice to send Israel away? I do not know Jehovah at all, and what is more, I am not going to send Israel away." Exodus chapter 5, verses 1-2. By that disdainful response, Pharaoh, who was believed to be a living God himself, refused to recognize Jehovah's godship. The issue of godship having been raised, Jehovah now proceeded to prove that he was the true God. The issue of godship having been raised, Jehovah now proceeded to prove that he is the true God. Pharaoh, through his magic practicing priest, summoned the combined power of the gods of Egypt in defiance of Jehovah's power. Moses and Aaron testified forcefully to Pharaoh about Jehovah's godship. So this is Moses sitting before Pharaoh. Over here we have the Pharaoh of Egypt. But Jehovah sent 10 plagues, each announced by Moses and Aaron, to demonstrate his dominion over earth's elements and creatures, as well as his supremacy over Egypt's gods. Exodus chapter 9, verses 13-16, chapter 12, verse 12. Following the 10th plague, Jehovah brought Israel out of Egypt by a strong hand. Exodus chapter 11, verse 9. It took much courage and faith for Moses, the meekest of all men, to appear before Pharaoh, not once but many times. Numbers chapter 12, verse 3. Moses, however, never watered down the message that Jehovah commanded him to deliver to Pharaoh. Not even the threat of death could silence his testimony. Exodus chapter 10, verse 28, verse 29, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 27. Moses was a witness in the true sense of the word. He testified repeatedly and forcefully to the godship of Jehovah. Following that deliverance from Egypt in 1513 BCE, Moses wrote the book of Genesis. Thus began a new era. the era of the writing of the Hebrew scriptures in the Bible, or the era of Bible writing. Since Moses evidently wrote the book of Job, he had some discernment of the issue between God and Satan. But as Bible writing progressed, the issues involving God's sovereignty and man's integrity would be put clearly on the record. Thus, all concerned could gain full knowledge of the great issues involved. Meanwhile, in 1513 BCE, Jehovah laid the groundwork for producing a nation of witnesses. Jehovah made clear to an entire nation their responsibility as his witnesses. A nation of witnesses. In the 3rd month after their leaving Egypt, Jehovah brought the Israelites into an exclusive covenant relationship with him, making them his special property. Exodus chapter 19, verses 5 and 6. Through Moses, he now dealt with them as a nation, giving them a theocratic government founded on the law covenant as their national constitution. Isaiah chapter 33, verse 22. They were Jehovah's chosen people, organized to represent him as their sovereign Lord. However, in the centuries that followed, the nation did not always acknowledge Jehovah's sovereignty. After becoming settled in the promised land, Israel at times fell away to worshiping the demonistic gods of the nations. Because of their failure to obey him as rightful sovereign, Jehovah allowed them to be plundered, and thus it appeared that the gods of the nations were stronger than Jehovah. Isaiah chapter 42, verses 18 to 25. But in the 8th century BCE, Jehovah openly challenged the gods of the nations in order to clear up that misimpression and settle the question: who is the true God? Through the prophet Isaiah, Jehovah issued the challenge: who is there among them, the gods of the nations, that can tell this prophecy accurately? Or can they cause us to hear even the first things, that is, things in advance? Let them as gods furnish their witnesses, that they may be declared righteous. Or let them, the peoples of the nations, hear and say, it is the truth. Isaiah chapter 43, verse 9. Yes, let the gods of the nations furnish witnesses who could testify regarding the prophecy of their gods. You are my witnesses, and I am God. It is the truth. by none of such gods could but none, it is the truth, but none of such gods could produce true witnesses to their godship. Jehovah made clear to Israel their responsibility in settling the question. Who is the true God? He said, you are my witnesses, even my servant whom I have chosen, in order that you may know and have faith in me, and that you may understand that I am the same one. Before me there was no God formed, and after me there continue to be none. I am Jehovah, and besides me there is no Savior. I myself have told forth, and have saved, and have caused it to be heard. Then there was among you no strain, when there was I myself have told forth, and have saved, and have caused it to be heard. When there was among you no strange gods, so you are my witnesses, and I am God. Isaiah chapter 43, verses 10 to 12. So Jehovah's people, Israel, constituted a nation of witnesses. They could emphatically affirm Jehovah's rightful, worthy sovereignty. On the basis of their past experiences, they could proclaim which conviction that Jehovah is the great deliverer. On the basis of their past experiences, they could proclaim with conviction that Jehovah is the great deliverer of his people and the God of true prophecy. Witnessing concerning the Messiah. Witnessing concerning the Messiah. Despite the abundant testimony of that cloud mass of pre-Christian witnesses, God's side of the issues was not completely settled. Why not? Because at God's own appointed time, after it has been clearly demonstrated that humans need Jehovah's rulership and that they cannot rule successfully on their own, Jehovah must execute judgment upon all who refuse to respect his rightful authority. Furthermore, the issues raised reach far beyond the human sphere. Since an angel had rebelled in Eden, the question of integrity to God's sovereignty reached up to and involved God's heavenly creatures. Hence, Jehovah proposed for a spirit son to come to the earth, where Satan would have full opportunity to put him to the test. That spirit son would be given the opportunity to settle in a perfect way the question, will anyone be faithful to God under whatever trial may be brought against him? Having thus proved his loyalty, the Son of God would be empowered as Jehovah's great vindicator, who would destroy the wicked and fully accomplish God's original purpose regarding the earth. But how would this one be identified? In Eden, Jehovah had promised a seed that would bruise the serpent-like adversary in the head and vindicate God's sovereignty. Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. Through the Hebrew prophets, Jehovah provided many details about that messianic seed, his background and activities, even the time that he would appear. Genesis 12, 1-3, 22, 15-18, 49, 10. 2 Samuel 7, 12-16. Isaiah 7, 14. Daniel 9, 24-27. Micah 5, 2. By the middle of the 5th century BCE, with the completion of the Hebrew scriptures, the prophecies were in place, waiting for the arrival of the Messiah to fulfill them. The testimony of this witness, in fact, God's greatest witness, will be considered in the following chapter. All right, and so this is chapter 1. Why does Jehovah... So this has been my reading of chapter 1 of the Proclaimers of God's Kingdom. Why should Jehovah have witnesses? Chapter 2 will be Jesus Christ, the faithful witness. And I will see you then. This has been Imperator of Forge. Thank you for watching. Forge Gang! I am still a heart man!